Thank you so much for coming out today. Welcome, is it speakers all right? Welcome to the People's Forum. We are a space for political education and cultural work, so thank you so much for coming out. How's that going? Feedback is all right? All right, nice. I'm not super tech savvy. I'm so sorry. We're super excited to have Rob Wallace here to share with us about his book, The Fault in Our SARS, COVID-19 in the Biden Era. Really catchy title. Definitely want to hear what made you choose that. So Rob is a trained evolutionary biologist who studies the evolution of infectious diseases and for years has warned about the outbreak of deadly pandemics. So you were very much on points with that. He's authored many books, including Big Farms Make Big Flu, Dispatches on Infectious Disease, Agribusiness and the Nature of Science, and Dead Epidemiologists on the Origins of COVID-19. Rob is also a public health activist and runs many startup organizations, such as Pandemic Research for the People. This is also really special because we have a series called Science Against Capitalism, the role of biophysical sciences in building a sustainable future for all. And Rob actually was one of our, the first speakers for it, and he gave a phenomenal seminar on socialist epidemiology. The recording of that is still up on YouTube. I highly, highly, highly encourage that you check it out. Really, thank you for setting an amazing bar for that series. It's still continuing. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So we're really glad to have you here. Thank you for your work. Thank you for coming, and I'm really excited. Over to you.
Mic on here? Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for coming today. I appreciate it. Those of you online, thanks for coming out here on a Friday evening. I've got a lot to say, so I have a lot of notes, in part because, like you, I've kind of lost my way in pandemic time, and I can't remember anything anymore. So one makes one's way through as best as possible. I think I'm going to start off a little bit just talking about the book itself. The Fault in Our SARS, obviously a play on the fault in our stars. You don't know which one you want to talk about, the Shakespeare or the John Green version. But there's an aspect of somewhat of fate being whether or not in our control or not, either direction. I think the Shakespeare one is that the fault, dear Brutus, is not in ourselves, but in is not in our stars, but in ourselves, right? And John Green, the young author, writer, young audience writer, talks about, in this case, in his book, and my kids, like at the time, it was 12, so he was a big fan of John Green, and then he grew up and decided John Green was not good anymore. So, but in that book, obviously you have a bunch of kids with cancer, right? So the fault is not in the kids; it's in the stars of chances of getting cancer. In this case, though, besides being just a play on the words, the fault in our SARS it emerges out of the notion that ultimately I came to the conclusion that it's not really a matter of not just a virus and the difficulty of SARS-2 and its complications, capacity to trick our immune system and able to infect millions of people in short order. And it's not merely a matter of the difficulties we had in developing a vaccine, the fact that the vaccine isn't something that offers total immunity at best, doesn't offer what's called sterilizing immunity, meaning you can still infect other people even if you've had the vaccine, you can still be infected. It's just that thankfully you have a less likelihood of being killed by the virus. Although there are, of course, examples of people who totally up to date on their vaccines and still being killed by the virus. So there's an aspect of perhaps back to the notions of fate and that someone can do absolutely everything perfectly in terms of their desire and willingness to protect themselves and at the same time still suffer the worst of outcomes, which is why, importantly, and this is the thing take home, of course, and maybe I'm starting off with it, that public health is not individual health. It's something else. The health of individuals is fundamentally integrated with the health of other people. And we've arrived at a moment, and I'll go into this more, that we have a system that's decided that public health doesn't exist anymore as a concept and as a practice. And so health is now individualized, health is commodity, health is something that you are personally responsible for. So despite the fact that you're exposed to a virus of a BSL-3 level virus, meaning Biosafety Lab 3, which required all the masking to just tool around with it, We have something that even in this late date still continues to circulate. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the book, but while we got to this point of talking about the state of things, I am a working member of the People's CDC. I'll go into the origins of that in due course. But I helped put out a show called COVID This Week. Runs about every week or every other week when we can do it. So I kind of keep abreast about what's going on in terms of the state of the pandemic and also the state of the research as far as it comes for what COVID's up to and what it does. So the state of things are that according to all the data, the virus is apparently in a bit of a trough, both internationally and nationally, meaning we are at reported lows of confirmed COVID cases globally and nationally compared to, let's say, even as far back as May 2020. In some sense, it's a good thing, most definitely, of course. We want this pandemic over. We want to be able to stop wearing masks. We want to be able to get together with people on a regular basis and not have to worry about these things. Even though also millions of people have somewhat exited out of the pandemic themselves. And we'll talk more about that as well. On the other hand, though, one of the worries about this is that there's two worries. One is that many countries around the world and many states within the United States have basically given up on surveillance. So we have a decline in keeping track of cases. That's a failure of the state, but in addition, they have basically spun out testing into a kind of rapid antigen testing that you do at home. But unlike other countries here in the United States, you're not actually required to report into the state what your COVID test came out with. So it's all likelihood that the numbers of cases are actually a lot more than they are being reported. So this is why I showed up here with a mask, because despite the fact that I'm exhausted about this as much as anybody else, very much still this thing is circulating and doing considerable damage. So that's somewhat the epidemiology of it. I will add also that the efforts to the decision to kind of roll back the non-pharmaceutical interventions, things like contact tracing was abandoned rather early. Mask mandates were largely abandoned. And we're down to basically nothing but some recommendations, right? But the collapse of the non-pharmaceutical interventions goes hand in hand with the collapse in the pharmaceutical campaign, meaning the vaccination campaign. So someone made a decision that those two things are differentiated from each other, that they're different. But each relies on the other, right? In order to get the non-pharmaceutical interventions to do well, you need to have thousands, if not a million, community health caseworkers out on the street, going door to door, going farm to farm out in the rural areas, checking in with people. It's not merely a matter of throwing up some mask mandates and leaving people be, right? There has to be a fundamental effort that other countries do as a matter of course, because they have this weird thing that governance is about somehow helping your people, and you see it time and again across different countries. It's not just China, it's New Zealand, it's Vietnam, it's Iceland, it's Spain, it's Uruguay, all made serious efforts to try to actually, whatever the political platform is or ethos, the notion that they're taking care of everyday people and their populace was somehow part of their mandate to govern. In neoliberal regimes, that's not the case at all. There was a desire to wash their hands of this as soon as possible. It wasn't merely a matter of American exceptionalism. You had British versions of that, and elsewhere the notion that we cannot be hurt. I remember there was some interesting meme about saying that the United States, we need a virus that we're prepared for, rather than, of course, the other way around is that you don't really have that choice often. And of course, the neoliberal program has much to do with the origins of the virus itself. So there's going back toward the deforestation development that's driving the incursions onto reservoirs of animals, animals who are acting as reservoirs for previously marginalized deadly pathogens, suddenly are up against the emergence of monoculture agriculture, mining, logging in such a way that the spillover events are speeding up in such a way, and the connection between the deepest of forests through the peri-urban landscape. These rural areas are becoming more urbanized, more hubs of industrial production and export. And so you have a really more simplified landscape. The complexity of the landscape usually boxes in these pathogens in a way that they're not able to escape. And now you've simplified things so that you can have a virus from the deepest forest, whether it's China or Amazon or the Congo, makes its way out right to the local provincial capital and then onto a plane and having cocktails in Miami in about several days, right? So the refusal to engage in public health here in the US and other countries on the neoliberal paradigm is hand in glove with the ethos that's driving the emergence of these pathogens in the first place. So we have the worst of both worlds in that direction. The source of things is being amplified, as also the places that are receiving the damage have decided that public health is no longer part of society anymore, which is extraordinary, or enough only for those who can pay for it. So in some sense, I've kind of hit on some of the major points in the book, but let's go kind of turn back again and talk a little bit about how we got to this point. So in 2020, October 2020, put out the first COVID book called Dead Epidemiologists on the origins of COVID-19. It's a short little book, but got it out in about 8 months. It's pretty swift of getting it out. And of course, 2020 was a particular historical moment at that time. One, we all hated Trump, liberals and leftists alike. He was hideous and awful, incompetent and deadly so. We were largely, most of us, although there were, of course, millions still going to work, for the most part, people were batten down the hatches a bit. And also, we were still curious and working through what the state of the nature of the virus was about. Now, we fast forward, this book comes out in February 2023, and it's a much different landscape, right? Now we're in a situation where Biden's now president, and we'll talk about his electoral campaign in a second. Biden's the president, and basically the liberals are split on this, right? There's a whole group of them that are firmly lock in step with Biden to basically declare at this point that the pandemic's over, right? So, and we'll talk about that history of how he got to that point. It makes the first couple essays in the book actually speak to this, as does the introduction. So there's a split. There's a split among leftists about this. There are, leftists who identified in the socialistic tradition who are considering themselves more libertarian in this notion. The notion that they pose the almost Foucauldian use of public health as a form of policing, and that people need to be, in essence, liberated out of the horrors of this. I don't necessarily agree with this on many terms, but I'm laying out the landscape here where we are. The right has also been awful from the beginning, and they've remained awful on this. So we don't really have to talk so much about them, except they seem to be able to lay down, each horror or each abandonment of public health in a way that gives cover for the liberals in the Biden administration to follow along. So they offer, which of course speaks to other matters, right? Speaks to, in essence, what is a deregulated regime, right? So we're in a situation where, look at the toxic derailment in Ohio. Those trains were basically uninspected. It comes from a decision to turn what is a critical core sector for the entire economy into something, in essence, a form of asset stripping, where you have Wall Street firms are signing up as part of the ownership, and they want a lot of money out of rail, to the point to reduce the staffing on those trains, reduce inspections, and so there's very much a mirrored image in terms of how COVID went down. Public health has been stripped going back 40 years, increasingly so. if not abandoned, then monetized, where previous interventions, non-pharmaceutical interventions, have been replaced by pharmaceutical interventions, right? So the way we're going to deal with a public health problem is we're going to come up with a vaccine, which we should come up with vaccines, and we should come up with pills, but one does not necessarily replace it with the other, right? So, the whole thing of public health is that you need to use a variety of interventions, because one intervention isn't going to be enough. So we're at a moment where, in essence, a lot of people, as we started off with, want to exit out of this pandemic. Certainly, Biden's been trying to do this from early on in 2021, and we're reaching a point where we've kind of dropped all the interventions, and I'll talk a little bit about the history in a second. So in other words, despite the fact that the two books speak somewhat of the same thing, we speak about COVID, we speak about its virology, its immunology, some of its molecular aspects that we've learned, speaks about the political economy around not only the response to COVID, but the research itself. And so this book took about a little bit longer than the first book, took about 2 years to write. It's a little bit thicker. There's a lot more going on here. But there's also a third aspect of it that makes it somewhat different, and that has to do with the issue that I came to the conclusion, as I started off with, that it's not merely a matter of the virus or vaccine. It's not merely a matter of the difficulty in turning data into public policy. It's always going to be that problem. But it came to an understanding that it had to do with the deep bedrock issues of the American ethos, how we got to a point where we're able to individualize the very thing that can't be individualized so much. Obviously, we all make decisions about our interaction with public health, and we should be part, the individuality is a part of the human experience, but in addition, something like public health is a communal experience and something that has to be dealt with at that level of things. And so to arrive at the moment in which not just Democrats and Republicans, but some leftists have come to the conclusion that it's only about your individual experience. And I get it. I know why, because it's exhausting. This has been terrible. This is a horrible experience to go through this. And all the things we missed out, not being able to get together, not be able to hang out with Granny, have birthday parties, do all the things that make being human a wonderful thing. To be able to get together, to go to concerts and things like that, and on a regular basis, right? And to do so without masks, right? And to have that in a situation in which capitalism already bleeds that joy and wonder on a basis where people are working so hard, just barely be able to make their rents. That was almost the ability to be able to go out to a bar and hang out with friends was basically the buffer that allowed many a person to continue to chug along in the face of the travails of a capitalist system that dehumanizes people as it is. So to have that taken away is just unbearable. And the answer to that is that you do the things to end the pandemic as soon as possible. And you have countries around the world, I mentioned a couple, that it wasn't merely a matter of doing so because of necessity of governance, but you want to return back to the common square again as soon as possible. The notion of, and so there were things even before vaccination that those countries actually did in their own specific way to basically allow their people to return to the town square. So it was a hard few months they did, but many of those countries were able to open up again in a matter of months. The US was just all half-assed, dithering bullshit that just allowed the virus to chug on. Like your refusal to engage in a full press public health response meant that you were incapable of actually ending or reducing a pandemic enough to allow people to return back to a much more fulfilling life. And so they've decided to deal with this problem not by ending the pandemic, but by declaring the pandemic is over. So they're dealing with it in a discursive fashion, in a way involving in in their sweet spot of a kind of propagandistic notions of capitalist realism, the notion of being able to toy with people's sense of what is real. But other countries, the first year they did very well, and so I always think of that picture of all the fans in New Zealand going to the rugby match. They're not wearing masks, not because they're assholes, but because they don't have to, because they got to a point that they didn't have an outbreak anymore. And I remember giving online talks to groups in Australia, and rooms of people in there with no mask. And at the time, it was so shocking because we were in full swing, and it was thousands of people dying a day here, and they were able to do that because they took care of business. And we decided not to take care of business at all. And it was fundamentally so. What I'm getting at is that there's that third piece in this book that's not in the first book, and that is I engage in this kind of meditations on the nature of American ethos, and its imprint upon the social psychology and the decision making that we arrived at across different political perspectives. So there's a diss from abroad that goes, the American left is more American than left. So there's the issue, and not to diss anybody in the room, myself included. And I have those impulses as well, and this is the hard part, to arrive at a moment to try to unplug yourself out of the presumptions of an empire you oppose. That's hard work. That's daily work. And so there's 3 essays in here. They're very long. I think one of them is like 100 pages. But it's sectioned into different sections, and the different sections seem to be talking about different topics. So the first one, it begins with the murder of a 13-year-old by a cop in Chicago in a back alley. And it gets into, at that time I had a 13-year-old. His mother asked me to look at the video of it. It was not, I don't like looking at those videos anymore. I used to do that on a regular basis as being a part of acting in witness to what is the daily crime of killing Black and brown people on a regular basis. And there is counter attack against that, the notion of a kind of, turning Black Death into a type of pornography. So there's different arguments about doing this. But after I saw Walter Scott's shooting in the back, I witnessed the first few minutes of George Floyd's death on a corner that I regularly go around in Minneapolis. I've had my fill. But I was asked by Mom to look at this thing, so if we need to talk to the kid about it. So you have these, in essence, split-second decisions that the cops make. And in essence, just like an infection's a split-second event, just like buying something is a split-second event. All these things are enactments of deeply social processes that extend through space and time. And so the cops' ability to shoot people on sight was built over the course of many decades, the legal precedents, but also the social practice of allowing that to happen, to move to the point that the murder of children is expected and even celebrated. I remember Sean Hannity calling that kid a 13-year-old man. So these are sociopsychosis that we're involved in, and they extend into the acceptance of mass death. And this is the moment we're in here right now. This is the terrible moment. This is where, only in the last few weeks I've kind of understand that the decision to wash our hands of 1.1 million dead Americans speaks to an aspect of preparation for, fascistic development. The notion of killing lots of people is now naturalized in the scope of things. I mean, it was before, for sure, right? But now it's at a scale and level and a tempo that is excruciating. And it was all excruciating, but this is, at a level that is unfortunately prepping people of a variety of political backgrounds for this kind of dirty work. Um, so let's go. So 2020 and 2023 are very different. And but let's go back a little bit about and the books are interesting because on the one hand they do speak to the same things as I said, virology, epidemiology, political economy and stuff, and the second book goes more into the meditation of how do we arrive at this moment, and also because it's not just Dr. Doom here, there are lots of discussion about how to get out of this too. So that's the critical work that needs to be done. And I do speak a lot about it, not just in personal terms, but for all of us to think about how do we, as we were getting at before, how do we unplug out of the presumptions of power we object to? And that takes considerable amount of work. And I talk a little bit about some of that work and what that involves. But so what's interesting is that I think the introduction for the first book, Dead Epidemiologist, is written in July 2020. And the earliest piece in this book here is August 2020. So there is an aspect of one flowing right into the other in terms of, so you do get a continuing series of where we are with COVID. I make the horrible joke in the introduction that this is the second of 19 COVID books I'll be writing. I will not be doing that. That's a terrible joke. I think I've had my fill for now. And presuming, of course, that, and this is the open question here, right? Are we at the end of this thing? Are we, some of the modeling, early modeling 2020 said 2024. Some of the early modeling said about 1 to 1.2 million dead Americans, and that's been on point as well. The expectations of the numbers dropping, I have become much more zen about these things. I've seen COVID go up, seen COVID come down, COVID rebound up and down. Seems a big tapering off at the present point, but I'm very zen at this point. I don't make any declarations of this being over. I show up here with a mask, not only because it's a good habit, because there are comrades and colleagues who are immune compromised, we want to honor them in the sense of allow them to be in public spaces. But I also, looking up as I was describing COVID this week, keeping up on the literature, and it's just horrible. All the new work coming in and explaining about what reinfection does. It increases the likelihood of long COVID. There's something, I've seen numbers anywhere from 19 million to 36 million Americans have had some version of long COVID. Some people 6 months and they're fine. Some people a year, 2 years, they're still down in the depths of that. That is not a place anyone wants to go. Long COVID is hideous and dangerous and ugly, and it hits all the body parts in all hideous ways. I'll describe only one, the brain, but I let you know that if you get into that spot there, our health system's incapable of helping you. We don't even doctors are having difficulty even recognizing that long COVID exists. But that is unfortunately part of the so-called new normal that's been written in. The notion it's much more important to open up the economy, get people back to work, and deal with the damage that comes from long COVID on their own. And once you get into long COVID, that's a kind of downward spiral that no one is able to help at this moment, not and on the doctor level, medical level, not the level of epidemiology, and people. There's a huge rage among people with long COVID about what's happened to them. And last week it was a long COVID awareness day. People posted online about their experiences. I read a whole bunch of them on the last episode of COVID This Week. That's under the People CDC YouTube channel if you want to take a look. And people are very eloquent about what hideous damage they've suffered. So you don't want to get this, okay? So, and the data's in that the more you get reinfected, the increasing likelihood you'll get long COVID. So you have people with one illness, no big deal, 2 illness, no big deal. And by 3 and 4, they're just utterly wiped out. So this thing is accumulative. And they're doing things, they're doing autopsy of people who had a relative mild infection a year ago and they died of something else. They're opening them up, and they're finding active replication going on in all different parts of your body. So they put people in freezers for 12 days, bring them out, test them on the 13th day, and still have active replication. This virus does not fuck around. And so I'll only tell you the brain one because the other ones are pretty horrible. But along with the cardiac fibrosis and the endothelium damage and the microclots and the macroclots and all the other parts of your body and stuff, the brain one is basically it kind of goes up through your nose. In the early variants, they would bust through and cause a lot of damage to your respiratory tract. It was what made the acute infection so deadly and damaging. Omicron, the sneaky bastard, basically infiltrates. Doesn't really do much damage, but it still does the damage in the brain. So it targets specific parts of the prefrontal cortex. So particular parts of the brain involving things like language and consciousness and even risk assessment, things like that. Basically, there's a lot of cell death. There's hypometabolism, meaning the amount of glucose that's consumed is in decline, and there's more deoxygenation. So particular parts of the brain are targeted for this stuff. And I have, along with the notice online from last week's Long COVID Awareness Day, there's also, I have friends who have gone through this. I mean, some of the most brilliant minds I know who cannot fucking put a sentence together, okay? So you do not want yourselves to go in that direction. But this is why I continue to show up in places with masks. I'm not 100% all the time with things, but I will go into a coffee place, get my coffee, and drink it outside. Here, sometimes I don't. So I haven't been 100%. I'm not the police here, okay? I'm not the Foucauldian cop, okay? I'm not saying that you should feel ashamed or that you go and have lunch with a friend in their favorite place. I'm just saying be judicious about things so that you reduce the chances. Because all this is statistical. As we started out with, there are people who do everything right and got the worst of it. And then there's the happy-go-lucky assholes who've done everything wrong and are perfectly fine, right? They're not to blame, right? This is not morality. This is not moral justice or anything. That if you did everything right, you'll be rewarded with some epidemiological heaven, and those who have failed should be killed. They shouldn't. And this is one of the important points in the book, is that the unvaccinated are not to blame. And this is what the Biden administration did. They turned it into an individualistic thing. They said that COVID's over. If you're vaccinated, then you're morally perfect person. And the reason why this continues, and there's so many deaths of those who did not vaccinate, and they are hideous, awful people. So in essence, what the Biden administration did was they were doing to red states what Trump tried to do to blue states in the first years. It's the same shit, but on just the shoes on the other foot. These people are shameless about these things. And as socialists and radicals, we are not down with that. We are with the people, even if we disagree with them. What public health is involved in any vaccination campaign. The failure of the unvaccinated to decide to vaccinate is an aspect of a failure of public health, because it's a failure of vaccine hesitancy and all that is part of the failure of vaccine access. And this is why you need 1 million people to hire the community health workers to go door to door. And the first time they knock on somebody's door, someone's going to tell them to fuck off. But you keep doing. You show up every couple days, you get a rapport going, and then you can get to a place where you can have a real conversation. And you might be able to get people down to get vaccinated. But that requires considerable amount of work. That's the work of governance. That's the thing you do. That's the hard part. This is not easy. You don't just flash a commercial. That's not enough. You have to talk to people. And that notion of public health has gone completely by the wayside here. In other countries, that's not the case. I mean, the most obvious examples are places like Cuba and Vietnam, and China did. They have fucked up, but they have. When COVID emerged, they realized that the scale of intervention needed to match the scale of the problem. So in Hubei, the province in which Wuhan is located, had its eruption. They weren't controlling it. They sent 40,000 health workers in there. They built hospitals in 10 days. They did not fuck around. They understood the damage. There's always all sorts of pathogens circulating in China, as elsewhere, but and I think they were playing loosey-goosey of not being sure about which one's going to matter, because you had all sorts of influenzas, H7N9, H5N2, all those that didn't mount too much, although they were and remain considerable dangers. But they were playing roulette too. We just sucked at it entirely. But the Chinese, they put a lot of effort to clamp down on this. And this is why the first 2 years for zero COVID, they did very well. We can talk about the damage on the other end in due course. But there was a notion of intervening in a way that that says the scale of intervention must meet the scale of the problem. And we don't do that here at all, because public health is not monetizable for the most part. And so therefore it doesn't exist. And so we expected the virus to cooperate with our American exceptionalism, and it did not get the memo from the White House. Now, I want to tie off the international part, and then we'll go back to Biden's election. So those countries did very well. You had the rugby matches, people en masse, delightful. And then it all went to shit in the last year. And the reason it went to shit is because populations got exhausted. And public health is, the key epidemiological variable is called trust. You have to have trust with the people you're working with or for. And when that trust starts to crumble, then all hell goes to loose. Now, my interpretation, and I write in the book, is it's because they were, in essence, put under siege. I mean, fuck, New Zealand does its job, China, Vietnam, Iceland, they do their job. They take care of business in their countries, right? And then we have all these other countries, the US included, who didn't do shit, who let the virus continue to evolve, to circulate. And the way I describe it is that those countries that battened down the hatches well enough and that did, in essence, were citadels under siege. And the neoliberal paradigm, the countries held them under siege and catapulted dead bodies and new variants across their walls in a way that they just kept clunking in however well you did, because ultimately a global pandemic is global, right? We can make the argument about whether or not you can have socialism in one country, but largely the big picture is that what happens on one side of the world impacts the other, particularly with a pathogen like this, and how well you do as a country fending off a terrible pandemic for a year and a half. Subsequently, their faith and their trust cracked. So they were forced to open up again. And they were condemned for not opening up early, right? This is the whole thing about zero COVID in China. The US used it as a bludgeon to say China bad because they were continuing to do zero COVID. And ultimately, after demonstrations, the Chinese government decided to open things up to terrible effect. A considerable number of people died. Their numbers up there in something like 1 million, as many as 1 million. It's not a good thing. But China, in essence, my view, was the last citadel standing up against the wave of COVID that was continually circulating around the world. Now, why would the US attack China for this? And I do get into this, and this has to do with the imperial rivalry, right? It's not just about TikTok. It's not just about, every little thing come up. People have had problems with TikTok for many years, but all of a sudden now the Congress meets about it. It wasn't about zero COVID. It wasn't just about the origins of COVID or any of those things, right? We are at a moment where China did the most gruesome thing, was that they rejected the notion that they were just a tributary economy, that they were just going to be the factory of the world. And so when COVID came, the US expected that China would open up, continue to crank out stuff to allow the supply lines and their local, the multinationals based here in the US to continue to operate unfettered, and the Chinese government decided that we're going to err on the side of protecting our people. And that was, in the minds of the US, completely off the wall, that they were supposed to, in essence, help continue to capitalist world system to continue on, even if it killed their millions of Chinese. And in fact, if you look at the same numbers, if China is a much larger country population-wise, if they had the same percent of people that died here in the U.S. died over there, they would have lost like 4.6 million people. So that was the expectation, that they would remain open to continue feeding supply lines. And this is a routine thing. This is clashes that historically go back a long time. An attempt to, as David Harvey describes, dump devaluation onto your rival. So when labor or capital declines in value at a crisis moment, you don't want to be caught holding the bag. You want your rival to be caught. So what had been considerable cooperation between the countries, at least economically for so long, now has come to a moment of fracturing off. So, and I alluded to it in the book. There's the Matt Damon vehicle, The Martian, where both the Chinese and the U.S. work together to save Matt Damon, right? And now Matt Damon is shit out of luck at this point, because that cooperation isn't going to happen, in part because the U.S. is in a spot where it needs to, as I describe it, externalize its failures in country onto other countries. It's classic. I mean, it happens all the time. I mean, countries around the world do it, but the U.S. is in a particular crisis moment where it's in rapid decline as an empire, and it's in essence externalizing the damage or fault onto other countries. So, how do we get to that point? We described it a little bit in the first book, Dead Epidemiologists, although I do make running reference to this in this book. If you go back to the world systems theorists, folk like Origi and Jason Moore and such, they describe capitalism as these cycles of accumulation that happen over different geographic spots. So for the first capitalist moment, Italian city-states, they cycle up, they crash out, and the Spaniards, then the Dutch, then the Brits, then the US. What happens on the upcycle is that money is turned into capital, and capital is used to build empire, infrastructure. So if you come out of World War II, the US is really much on the upcycle of that, and it's taken the reins of running the world capitalist system. So the Bretton Woods organizations, right, the World Bank, the IMF, and in the book, I declare that CDC is also a Bretton Woods organization. I came to conclude, that was, I think, founded in 46, 47. Their objective is to clean up the epidemiological mess that capitalism causes around the world. So the introgression into local forests and spillover events, we send CDC people to put down the fire so that capitalism can continue to continue on. But it comes out by the early 70s. We start entering the neoliberal moment. It's basically cash. We're on the other side of the cycle of accumulation. We're turning capital back into money. So in other words, our rich people are cashing out, meaning they're turning infrastructure back into liquidity for themselves. So they're cashing shit away. So all the public commons that were built post-World War II are now being monetized and broken up and sold off. And I talked about public health in it. I give some of the details in the book. But that goes for a lot of things, like fracking, like you're gonna squeeze out some gas out of the ground in return for poisoning the water of your own people, right? They don't give a fuck at this point. It's now about taking public commons, squeezing out whether land or labor or notions of commons, or the railway line, and the Ohio derailment. These are all elements of the ending of the American moment, and so there's a lot of, these are masters of misdirection. So they have a lot of history in terms of pointing fingers at other directions, right? And so in this case, You have Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary, kind of shrug his shoulders over Ohio because we have thousands of derailments a year, as if somehow that covers what you guys just did, or that the thousands are a good thing. Um, but that goes for the failure of the public health system under COVID and other things, right? So all this is falling apart. So the neoliberals have their version of this. The fascists now are moving in a direction of misdirection of, as we all know very well, it's about punching down on people, right? So uh, so they are having their hideous moments. That's the way they're going to deal with it, right? So there's all the wave of transphobic legislation, all that stuff. It's a moral panic as an attempt to distract from, to both energize their base and also distract from a moment in which their country's falling apart around them. And they're to blame, but they want to be able to point fingers in other direction. That's the domestic version. And then, of course, the international version is both presently Russia and China. There was, in essence, a somewhat agreement for several decades post-Berlin Wall to say, we're going to work together as, I think Marx called them, brothers that are fighting brothers, right? This is the bourgeoisie around the world are in competition with each other, but they work together, right? And so now, at a moment in which there's deep domestic collapse, certainly in the U.S., potentially in Russia, less so in China, but that Chinese workers are always striking in China. There's always pushback on that level. But the U.S. seems to be really spearheading this effort to try to engage in a war. If anything, and the more difficult and damaging declaration and attempt to make that happen, the more it tells you how incompetent and distracted and in failure our present ruling political class is. It speaks to their panic the more they have to do that. Because power, what power really is the capacity to exercise it in a way that you don't have to do anything. And what the fuck are you doing blaming countries this way that when ostensibly you run things? Of course, the pushback is that the war is one of our major industries, so that's going to be rolled in there. But I mean, you've gotten to a point where people like Henry Kissinger are agog over the possibility, or meaning he's totally upset and think it's ridiculous for us to risk a world war with China and Russia. And when you have a murderous man like Kissinger worried about this shit, things are really pretty hideous now. So how many minutes, how long have I been going for? I'm going for a while.
Yeah, you could go talk about 10 more minutes, and then we could open up for Q&A.
Okay, very good. Why don't we do that? So let's that's kind of the international feel for it. But if you want to talk a little bit about the domestic side of things. So going back, Biden runs against Trump, and he runs against him on COVID. And he still barely wins the election, despite all this. 500,000 Americans are on the ground, and somehow, he barely makes it through. But he runs on the platform of that we're going to run this thing better, and we're going to stop COVID, and we're going to do it in a grand Rooseveltian fashion. We're going to have a pandemic testing board. We're going to have a public health jobs program. We're going to hire 100,000 community health workers. We're going to have scientists run our program. We're going to respect science. We're going to do all these things. We're going to deal with the racial disparities in COVID outcomes. So here we have a die-in-the-wool neoliberal running as a Keynesian Democrat. Like, we need big government at this moment, which speaks to the scale of things, right? There are also a lot of problems with what he offers too, and in the first two essays describes it. The first part of it is that what he prescribes isn't going to be enough. The second, of course, is that he's like, I discussed this. The first essay is written November 2020, second in January 2021. And I give chapter and verse about the way that the Biden administration is likely to abandon their own plans. And so by May 2021, right, if you remember, CDC goes, hey, those of you vaccinated, you don't need your mask anymore. And this is at a time in which they know that the Delta variant's coming out of India. Everybody knows it. So Biden's desperate to get out of this. Ostensibly, he wants to reopen the economy again. He talks about July 4th being Independence Day, not quite a Will Smith movie, although now that has a different connotation. But he basically, that's a total failure. It totally goes to shit. Delta arrives, sweeps through, but he does get his act together enough. Now, when I say getting his act together, I'm thinking from his vantage point. So by February 2022, okay, no, let me stop there. December 2021, CDC declares that they're going to recommend that quarantine be reduced from 10 days to 5 days. You remember that, right? They do so not on base of any scientific evidence. I mean, if you look at the viral dynamics, yes, a lot of people are cycled through in 5 days, but there's a long tail to that. And you have lots of people in studies that followed showed this, that you have people who are infectious up to 14 days. They're getting their rapid antigen tests are still positive that far out. And sending people back that are still infectious back to work is not about stopping the pandemic. It's about keeping the economy going. And when we speak about the economy, we're speaking about the capacity to continue to produce profit for billionaires. That's the objective here. Now, where do they get this bright idea? Well, they acted within matter of days upon receiving a letter from the CEO of Delta Airlines. And a co-signer on that was Carlos Del Rio, who's the president of the Infectious Disease Society of America, except he's signing off as a paid consultant of Delta Airlines. So you see where the epidemiology and the class character of governance are interwoven with each other, right? So you have, rather than say people CDC has science for the people, you have science for the employers. And it's very powerful, and it has capacity to allow CDC to go, and the letter's only 2 pages. It makes very little reference to any concrete literature behind this notion that you can go to 5 days. So in essence, there was a declaration that they were just going to continue the pandemic, even as by February 2022, the administration had received from its paid consultants a game plan for exiting out of COVID as a thing. And that had to do with a long program of reducing the various interventions and moving in direction to get people to unmask, get back to work. And they were quite successful. So all those things that were built in the first year, not that good, $600 there, but enough to, some of the unemployment insurance, you had the Paycheck Protection Program, you had eviction moratorium, you had child welfare monthly payments. These things really helped the American people during this time, and it's important you do that, right? Because we want to keep a pandemic from spreading. If someone's infected, they should be able to stay home and not be so desperate that they have to get back out and start working as soon as possible. And there's a piece in here from the Pandemic Research for the People, the dispatch that reproduced here, about how those dynamics work out in Los Angeles during 2020 and 2021, and about how the failure of access to sufficient housing interfaces with the incapacity to get employment that covers your bills, and the geography of LA and all those things, how they're very much interwoven together. So they start off with the social stuff. They strip it off. They move toward ending various mask mandates. They move toward moving more toward the more biological core of the COVID response. And so we're moving into a direction that by May 11th of this year, there'll be the end of the public health emergency. And 15 million people will be kicked off Medicaid. Those people were kept on because Medicaid didn't get into the business of checking on everybody, so they're gone. Various telehealth things are missing. Paying for vaccinations done. The vaccination and the biomedical interventions, the drugs are now going to be more privatized. So if you want those things, you have to pay for them. So in essence, we're back to the model of American health system, where you get to have health if you can pay for it. This is the terrible moment that we find ourselves. But in the interest of moving beyond merely the Dr. Doom stuff, talk a little bit about what we can do in the other direction. So as was described, I helped found a couple organizations, Pandemic Research for the People and the People CDC. People CDC emerged out of that December 2021 decision to turn it from 10 days to 5, because it's just unconscionable. There's no basis for doing that other than to please employers. And so a group of us, socialists, but also liberals, got together to, in essence, try to fill in the gap. We don't have any illusions. We're not a federal agency. We don't have thousands of employees. We don't have $12 billion a year, right? We are fairly a small group, but still with people from all around the country getting together. Yes, public health practitioners, medical doctors, but also everyday people like nurses, there are firefighters. There have been all sorts of people that have come in to help out to do this. And so there's a bunch of programs that have come out of it. There's a weather report that comes out every week. There's a COVID This Week that I'm part of it that reports. There's all sorts of dispatches on there on basic mechanics about what to do. If you want to have a gathering, how do you do a safer gathering? How do you go about doing that? How do you do ventilation in schools? How do you do ventilation at home? So there's really a lot of brass tack stuff there. And there's also the more bigger political analysis of it. But and the question is, what is the People's CDC? Is it an act of protest? Is it a practice in parallel governance? Is it a palliative? Is it an exploration on what a more revolutionary approach might look like? We don't have any illusions about what we're doing, but there are aspects of, and it's, for me, the first time I really participated in something that had a real better smell here in the U.S. of an act of parallel governance as far as public health goes. And in response, on the other side of things, the entirety of the establishment public health here in the U.S. has basically abandoned the very concept of public health and lined up behind the Biden administration under the notion that having access to your grants and to put presidential power is more important. So they have fully committed, occupational suicide, not in terms of the money, but in terms of their sense of pride and practice of what you do. So there's a real divide in public health in a way that is really much more articulated now. And so I think there are thousands, millions of people, frankly, here in the U.S. do not like how this is going down. Yes, there are millions who want to get out of COVID as soon as possible, but there is, I think, a true divide in terms of how this might pan out. And it speaks to what's going to happen when the next pandemic comes. It speaks to what is in essence largely a class war going on. I mean, if you're running bomb trains through working class towns, knowing increasingly likely that they'll turn over and explode, I mean, there really is much more of a hideous whiff of class war about it. The willingness to rake in money for Wall Street firms with the risk of destroying a landscape and the thousands of people in the area and giving them cancer. It goes to the willingness to pay off for the banks that were failing. In a matter of days, they'll take their businesses taken care of, while working people's needs are not being met. So I think it's increasingly a divide that the American people and people around the world very much see in a way that wasn't, it's always been shrouded in a certain fog, as I described them. They're masters of misdirection in terms of the political class. That's why they're hired to do their job. In essence, run interference for what is every day thievery, and often to the deep wounding of people, not in terms of just their well-being, but their very health and lifespan. So I'll stop there for now, and just to say that public health isn't just about a vaccine. It isn't just about a virus. Deeply embedded into political economies, and that has long been a public health principle, that one has to weave those things in order to get to the understanding of how population health ended up the way it is, and how one gets out of that to lead to a time and place in which, instead of the economy or capitalist profits being the number one thing, that people's well-being and health is front and center. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Rob. Oh yeah, give a round of applause.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think it's time that we could open up for some Q&A. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and I'll bring the mic to you. And for folks online, feel free to type any questions in the chat. So, anyone want to start it off?
Well, thank you so much. That was really tremendous. And I'm deeply appreciative. I use your books with my students in class. And
thank you.
So I was excitedly telling them that I was going to come hear you tonight, like Rob Wallace, rock star.
Thank you.
So another aspect that I see, I teach political science, St. Peter's University in Jersey City. And like many institutions across the nation and even the world, the social sciences and the humanities are just absolutely crashing. And it really frightens me, because so much of what you talk about, you need to have that education. And our students aren't, they're not getting that. And so, thinking about people trying to make sense of what's going on is going to be really difficult in the next couple of years, because very few people are studying the social sciences and the economics. Another question that I had is if you could speak more to regenerative agriculture in thinking of ways out. How do we get out of this mess? I'd love to hear more about that. And I know that the prep group looks at that a lot. I'll stop. I have more questions, but I'll stop there. Yeah.
Okay, those are great questions, and so I mean, most definitely, those. As I was trained as an evolutionary biologist, natural scientist, and deeply involved in statistical analyses and things like that. But that I find that work critical, but it only takes you so far. I mean, there is fundamental questions about why are we doing this? I mean, the testing hypotheses, the positivist empiricism, testing hypotheses with data does not speak to what questions to ask. And those questions are fundamentally embedded into the values and notions of what our society is about. And if you don't know those, then what ends up happening is that one ends up, as my father likes to say, studying fundable trivialities, or propping up an empire that was willing to pay you to do so. And I, on a personal note, I went to an arts high school. I went to LaGuardia High School of the Arts here. I did science there too, but I always the hard road of getting different domains of thinking that have developed across the history of humanities, such a fundamental part of integrating those things together so they speak to each other. And and this came up. I did some postdoc work at the University of California, Irvine, did look at genetic sequences, and from those of bird flu strain H5N1, figured out that there's a certain province in southern China that was the source of it, Guangdong, I made the mistake about becoming curious about something, which is not always the best move in science, if you want a career in it, in that I wanted to know why this bird flu emerged in Guangdong in 1997. So they got me into the kind of economic geography of agriculture in the region, the history of agriculture, the kind of the political economy of agribusiness. And so it allowed me a much fundamental, rounder understanding of how this pathogen emerged in this spot. And it also made me understand that causality actually moves in different directions. So while the sequences tell me that it emerged from Guangdong, if you take more of a relational geography and you see flows of capital as it moves from one side of the world to the other, you realize that 4/5 of the foreign direct investment through Hong Kong went to Guangdong to help them reorient the type of agricultural production they did. So while the tales in the newspapers were that Hong Kong suffered the damage of spillover from Guangdong as a kind of morality tale, in fact, Hong Kong was part of the relational geographies that led to Guangdong changing its production. So, it becomes, notions of blame become ridiculous at that point. I mean, it goes in multiple directions. Hong Kong supplied Guangdong with the funding it needed to change its agriculture. And that led to the spread of the virus back into Hong Kong and elsewhere. And that's everywhere at this point. As these relational geographies are moved to the point that we see places like New York and London and Hong Kong as disease hotspots, because those are the sources of capital that drive the development and deforestation around the world. And so you see that time and again. You see, we looked into Ebola emerging out of West Africa as a kind of the result of the structural adjustment programs to the region. You have Zika emerged, considerable damage in Brazil. It comes out of the peri-urban development of agriculture from the deepest forests to, as I was describing earlier, to the regional capitals. And so then you start to see that it's the interplay of countries and sources of capital and labor that drive the emergence of pathogens in one place to the other. And it's not just this GPS coordinate. And if I continued as an evolutionary biologist and just focused on that, and it's brilliant work people do in that field, is that they miss this fundamental issue of causality extending from one side of the planet to the other. And the social sciences are fundamental to that. And I've moved on to even humanities, in fact. I mean, the recapitulation of stories of the kind of Promethean impulse and the pushback, the Epimethean notions that have been largely set aside to our detriment. And you need to fold in these cultural histories to understand how you became a scientist and what it promotes, what impulses are promoted and which ones are staunched. And you have to, that gets into what we talked about at the beginning, unplugging yourself out of the presumptions of empire. And you have to call upon the deep histories of knowledge, not just the European histories, others of all the tools you can call upon to liberate yourself in the course of trying to liberate others. So that's, as far as regenerative agriculture, I'm glad you brought that up, because that should have been discussed as a practical source modality of liberation and exiting out of this trap, and turning whole fields into monocrop and whole thousands of poultry and livestock into genetic monoculture is the best way to select for a virus that kills 1 billion people. So you need to reintroduce agrobiodiversities across whole landscapes at the farm level and at the regional level, where you have different types, breeds of birds and hog and livestock grown in a way that if there's an outbreak that happens to come, and there will be, because these are living beings, that it can't just explode over the course of 1 million birds. And the more birds you have, the more likely you select for the more virulent pathogens, because those are the ones that can just burn throughout this entire field of poultry and ramp up in its deadliness before spilling over into humans. Industrial poultry don't reproduce on site. All that breeding's done at the grandparent level offshore for morphometric characteristics like fast growth and bigger breasts in poultry. And so when there's an outbreak in an industrial barn, you might see 1 or 2 poultry still alive. Maybe there's some weird quirk in their immune system that allows them to survive, and we should use those as the progenitors of the next generation. So in actuality, use natural selection as an ecosystem service for us. But you can't do that in industrial poultry. There's no breeding on site in a barn. That's all growing out for delivery to the supermarket. So you need to do what smallholders are already doing these days, right? So all of it's already done. It's all in practice over thousands of years. Smallholders, indigenous, who grow things in a way that allows the agrobiodiversity to act as an immune firebreak against those pathogens from exploding out. Also allows reproduction on site so that natural selection in your poultry can basically track the pathogen as it circulates in real time. Like, you don't have to wait for a vaccine. I mean, in humans, it took us a year, which was really fast for us to come up with a vaccine, but we lost 50,000 Americans here on that. And for an outbreak of H5N2 in 2015, they never came up with a vaccine for that. Vaccines are important and critical and need to be distributed everywhere, and they're also something of a reactionary response, because you have to take a long time to get to the point that you bring it out into the field. So you need to do what I describe as these probiotic ecologies, where you have ecological relationships already in practice that basically box out the more deadly pathogens from emerging in the first place. And that, in essence, is the history of agriculture until it was industrialized. So, I mean, I'm not saying there weren't outbreaks or we wouldn't have outbreaks, but not at a scale in which we've arrived at, where, you know, an avian influenza that emerges may not do the 2% case fatality rate that COVID did. It may do the 50% one. And then where are we going to be ending up on that? So this is why I ended up working more in agriculture, a New York City boy. What the hell am I doing that? Because I realized you need a new agriculture to keep it from happening in the first place. So I'm in the Midwest now. I work with farmers and food activists. I've done what I could to learn the language of how to operate in that circle, because these are people, whatever their politics are, they understand this point very clearly, and they are working together in that direction. And what's remarkable about farmers is that they have, despite being cornered into spots of having to use inputs, of large companies or and selling back to the same end buyers, who are these huge monoliths, Syngenta and all those folk. At the same time, there is a little bit more wiggle room in which the producer, and there's a question of what is a farmer? Are they an owner? Are they a proletariat? There's always that discussion. But farmers have some wiggle room that a lot of factory workers often don't have presently, in that they can change their modes of production in a way that they just need to work through how to allow them to pay their bills. And so you'll have farmers, some of them quite very conservative, make the pivot toward moving in a more direction of a regenerative agriculture or an agroecology, in which it's not just about healthy soils or allowing your poultry to reproduce on site. It's about building more cooperative, cooperative units with other farmers in a way that that kind of cooperation allows them to grasp the locus of control, the capacity of community to make decisions. And so any of those things that I described in terms will require the return of farmer autonomy, and it would require kind of a interrelation between rural and urban. And it requires basically to destroy the basis of Republicans and Democrats playing one region against the other, rural against urban. And so, hopefully moving toward a direction of avoiding the Civil War. It seems to be percolating, right? So that is an area in which there's a lot of fruitful possibilities in terms of doing a number of things together, of preparing the landscape for the climate change, for reducing the pesticides in the rural landscapes, introducing the agrobiodiversity to stop pathogens from emerging, returning locus of control to rural communities that have been largely turned into sacrifice zones. So, yeah, you had a question.
Hi. So you were talking about some countries became like citadels defending themselves against the irresponsibility of others. So if we would compare like New Zealand as a citadel to an anti-citadel like Sweden, can we actually draw conclusions, or does it all become the same with the distance of time?
What was that last part of your question?
With the distance of time,
Yeah.
do their like COVID outbreaks become similar, or
Right.
is there actually, or mortality rate, does
Yeah.
it become similar? Is there a big difference? Are they sacrificing different people, age groups or so? So,
Yes.
and maybe another one. Why is there, what happened to making like interior spaces less COVID friendly? Meaning like, why is there not a big push for better ventilation systems?
Yes.
I think the New York Times also had an article that with UV, you could probably get rid of a lot of germs in the, so, I mean, it's unimaginable. There's not a investment program, makes economic sense, and it actually probably could really very easily achieve stuff. So
Yes.
why is that not happening?
Yeah, I'll answer your second question first, and along the lines of like People's CDC, we're big fans of better ventilation in schools, in workplaces, in your home. And historically speaking, it was described that the reason why a lot of older New York City apartments are heated way too much because they wanted to force you to open your windows. This is coming out of the influenza pandemic. So there was an aspect of, we're going to build in your ventilation whether or not you want it by forcing you to keep your windows open even in winter, which of course is the time and more likely infections like that would occur. So we're big fans. We have a couple pieces on ventilation on the People's CDC website. We also co-developed an app called Breathe Safe, breathesafe.xyz. You can look it up. It's just in beta phase presently, but it's a mapping program that combines carbon dioxide measures for places and restaurants, and also the size and how busy it is and what activities are going there. So you can get a measure of whether or not it's a place you can go, gives you the likelihood of being infected. So some places are better to go than others. But clearly I mean, as we were getting into the history of the notion of better ventilating things is definitely one part of an intervention. And we subscribe to the Swiss cheese model of intervention, that every intervention is going to have holes in it. It's not a panacea. So vaccination, yes, please be vaccinated. You will less likely die, but it doesn't mean you're definitely not going to die. It's a statistical protection. It's not a categorical one. So get ventilated, mask as much as you can. Make good decisions about gatherings, but the ventilation's another part of it. And so we're very much about the practical aspects of it. But if you have enough pieces of cheese, and even though each one has a hole, eventually all the holes are covered by one cheese or piece of cheese or another. And I like cheese, so. So that's one aspect of it. And as far as comparing countries, in the second to last piece in this book, it's called Governance is Key, and that comes out of some modeling that my group did on how different countries doing different forms of governance, how that would select for the likelihood of a strain to become vaccine resistant. So there are ways and means by which to model the decision making that countries did and their impact on the resulting viral load and damage. And we emphasize the important point that vaccination isn't enough. It's the decision making done at the level of governance as far as how to get that stack of cheese together in a way that basically corners the variant in a way that it can't evolve resistance to the vaccine. So you need the non-pharmaceutical stuff to make the vaccine that much more effective. So something like Sweden, there's a lot of controversy over that country. There's a very point of a clash between minimalists, denialists, and those who opposed it. Sweden went about its business, and my view of it is that they suffer the consequences of it, however much they denied it. And other countries didn't accept, and here's your point, that at some point you reach a point where you basically break every country. And this is the horrible moment that we arrived at. And, some of the confirmed deaths are about 7 million, but the excess deaths globally is like 15 million or so. And that's a lot of people. And it could have been worse for sure, but I don't go about, that's not something to click our heels about. And as I was said, the first thing is that it doesn't mean that we're out of this quite yet. I want us to get out of it as much as possible. I would love that COVID would be over and all for all the wrong reasons. Like I will deal with the consequences of people really fucking up and then it petering out, because sometimes pathogens do that. It might be that we move toward more of an endemic thing, but like, Minnesota, where I'm situated, the number of deaths at a time in a state that's doing very well is greater this winter than the 3 years previous for flu combined. So our notions of what is normal now is upgraded in terms of, or downgraded as it were, in the sense of accepting the increased possibility of death for a virus that ostensibly at this moment is in a trench. So the time thing is a bit worrisome. I like I said, I take a very Zen view of it. Like I do not come to conclusions. Like you can make projections, I make no predictions. Fingers crossed this ends shortly, but the thing is that going to come with a level of endemicity that involves a certain level of damage to not just our immunocompromised colleagues, but also those of us who are healthy, who on infection 4, gutterball it. Any other thoughts or questions?
One from online and then the last question. Carol's artwork says, any advice for how to talk to people who have been persuaded by all the capitalist propaganda to fully buy into the return to normal as outbreaks are still occurring? So there's one. And
I just loved how you started the SARS book with the talk about that one thing we saw a rise in was people getting their teeth whitened.
Oh, yeah.
And it just kind of brought to mind, maybe you want to speak a bit about that New Yorker article that was a real hit on the People CDC, getting on the liberal ire, upsetting them so much, not having the shiny white teeth.
Yeah. So as far as the online question, we are in a deep bind. The question was, if I remember, what can we do to push back against the capitalist propaganda that this is over and we can go to normal? And it's hard work. There's Paul Farmer, who is well known as a public health practitioner on the global stage, talked about, he quoted Tolkien to the notion, I have lost the long war, And we are in a spot where we, at one and the same time, have done really good work in terms of pushing back and getting local community groups to adapt some of the People CDC principles and practices. We talked to some school systems, and we've got local community groups, but we're at a local scale in a way. At the same time, though, I think it does work at the level of the individual. You can talk to people, but it gets back to that notion that of the thousands of community health workers we didn't deploy that could have gone door to door and talked to people, and that first knock on the door isn't going to work maybe for some people, and other people it might. But my experience has been, I take a very relaxed view of it. I try not to preach. I try to talk to people about other things, and in essence, continue the notion that we are a community, and that's not just, you don't go directly for the sore spot, right? You talk to people about other things, and then this might come up in passing, and there's an aspect of trust that's necessary to make sure that that conversation can be had as a form of dialogue rather than as a form of battle. And so that takes some patience and acuity to get to that spot. Big picture, like find your allies, people who agree with you, start and work with them to start making this more than merely about you as an individual having to change everything, right? You find people who agree that something must be done, and you start working through ways in which in your local community you can make some inroads. And then just for individual people, as far as the convincing them, once you get to a point of having conversations about all sorts of things, you'll find the opportunity to have your say. I have a farmer friend who thinks I'm full of shit on COVID, on stuff. We've been having jocular clashes over 2.5 years, but they can be still possible to tell him about the dangers of long COVID in a way that hasn't been described at all anywhere, really. And you can have the moments of clarity in which to get them to subtly shift their vantage of it, and even if they are still somewhat more minimalist about it, they won't be denialist about it, and to move them in the direction that there's sometimes masking is definitely the way to go, or definitely you should get your vaccine, and as order of protection to permit you to avoid the worst of a long COVID. So it takes a lot of patience, it takes a lot of energy, can be and sometimes exhausting, but I think there's nothing that can get you out from having to do that hard work on establishing a relationship of trust and mutual kindness that can get you to have those conversations at a level of family and friends and people around you. Other people are going to be total shitheads. You don't get into debates about it. Some people, don't waste your time and energy. Some people you want to ally yourself with and really have really good conversations about how to move the ball forward. And then there's the people that might be willing to have a real conversation about things. And those are the people that you want to have those, that are worth having those conversations with. And the second question was about New Yorker article, right. So at the end of December, in what is the last week of December, which is known as the garbage can of magazines, that's where they dump their crappy articles. So I took some comfort in the fact that New Yorker decided to dump this article there. But the New Yorker ran basically a hit piece by Emma Green against the People CDC and in which she described us as a bunch of ragtag rads who are causing problems. I talked to this person for 2 hours, and the first thing I said to her is like, I know what you are. I know that you wrote this article in The Atlantic in the spring of 2001 about how so-called liberals who are still upset about COVID are ridiculous. And here, 520,000 Americans died since that article and our conversation here. And she had fucking nothing to say in reply to that. And I spent the next hour and 45 minutes putting her through hell over all the ways she was wrong, but I also described People's CDC, our reasoning, and she certainly went on to red bait us and describe a lot of things I talked about today, about the historical confluences that led to the American moment as being overly Marxist, is how she described it, as if that's a bad thing. But it is very much a signal, as you were getting at, that to the liberals that, oh, here's our enemy, because, and again, like People's CDC, have people all sorts of different political backgrounds, including liberals. So this was not, that's not how we operate. We're very much a coalition. We work with all sorts of people, and we make our way through to try to get some good work done, because there's a common understanding that public health is necessary and should be protected and provided for as best we can for America, for the American people. And what's remarkable is that it was a good way to draw out of the woodwork all the hideous people who, largely what Greg Consalvis, who's a Yale professor, writes about as the meta-experts, meaning people who don't know anything about a topic, but they're experts at being experts. So they pretend to know everything about COVID, even though they have no training or anything about this. So it drew them out as being supportive of Greenpeace. And then at the same time, like 10 to 1, the outrage that people had of the way that she treated us was such that that it elicited thousands of people to write us in support, and also a list of volunteers. I mean, we're not quite at the scale to be able to assimilate everybody and get everybody working. So that's one of our difficult points. But it riled up enough people to realize that her hit job, what it was for. But she's failing upward, right? This is how she got to New Yorker in the first place. So people, and it's not only her. You have it in the public health domain. So you have people who, by virtue of their hideous attacks on notions of public health, even though they're trained in the field, are going to landing in soft spots and rewarded for those efforts to, in essence, run interference for the employer class. Some liberals just want to go to brunch. I understand. I get it. But it's in the end, upon the bodies of thousands of people and the damage to the well-being of millions others, you have to make some decisions that the extent to which one, yes, must live your life, but also do the things necessary to allow us to stop this pandemic from happening and move into a next phase. You have to do things. You can't just declare things. You can't go, I'm vaccinated, I'm in a safe neighborhood, and fuck everybody else. That's a hideous thing to be around. And there's an aspect of the attack was not unexpected. There's an aspect of that we take some pride in it, because that means that we got to a point that we alerted the liberals that we existed. I mean, not that I'd be doing that just for that reason. We had other things in mind. But it just speaks to pushing back in the notion that a truly radical stance can find its place and moment, and have its historical role to play. So despite the fact that presently much of the country particularly among the political class across the political spectrum, are moving in a direction that COVID's over, that there is a counter history and a counter momentum that continues on in a way that does draw, for us here, even in the States, the notion that another history is possible. And I think we should draw a lot of comfort and meaning from that possibility that we can push back. And I think people are really pissed over things like Ohio derailment and the deaths of their cousin, their grandfather, and their mother from COVID. And you have families that are hit on a multiple level. And these are pains and difficulties that do not go away. So this sits deeply in them about what was done to them. And so, to continue to work to build constituencies in that direction to say that we deserve a public health that treats each of us as worthy of living.
Thank you so much, Rob. A huge round of applause. We also have a bunch of folks who joined us online, so huge round of applause from there too. Thank you all so much for joining. Rob, this truly is an honor. Every time you come, you bless us with so much information, so thank you, and I hope we get to have you back soon. As I mentioned earlier, Rob started off our series, Science Against Capitalism. Tomorrow we're having our 5th seminar on the rise of, on language, the technological divide, and the rise of AI. So if you're interested, come join us at 4:30. And thank you.
Yes.
Have a good evening.
If any of you have books, I'd be happy to sign them.